Zambia as a country of investment, and maybe get into a little bit on the issue of the values that you think are important in terms of making those deals, business deals, come alive. Thank you.
Right, thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be on the same panel with individuals I respect very much. I was asking Dr. Chakwe, I said, I've seen you somewhere. He says, oh, I said, I think I've seen you somewhere. Now I remember I've seen him on television and on TVN. One of the most challenging things for a developing nation like Zambia is how to say no to a gift that you believe will compromise values that you hold so dear as a country. And at times you have to look at the poverty that your people are going through, that this donation can make a significant change in the lives of people. But you know the consequence, that long term you won't sustain it, to devalue you, you'll be compromised so much that the world will not respect you anymore. So you deal with these issues, and I remember having a meeting just 4 weeks ago, and issues were spelled out about what you're doing well as a country and things that you need to change. And they saw that one or two of those areas, I couldn't accommodate them. And as we walked out to the car park, they were taking me down, and one of the people whispered, says, you know, we know, Your Excellent Ambassador, these things are very hard, even for us. Actually, we know they are hard for you. But just to do them, we can't. There are things we may not, because we're governed by 3 critical principles, and we call them Zambia, we call them the 3 C's that govern our stature as a country. And this is what gives us the dignity that we want. And I'll just summarize them so that we can hear from the others as well. Number 1 is the Constitution of Zambia. The national constitution, of course, has gone through many phases, and most of the changes have to really do with democracy, because we are now a democracy country. But it's really evolving. Democracy is changing its face every day. It's a value for us. And we have seen that in the USA now, since 2020, the challenge of democracy has come to the face, that actually even the model country of democracy is yet to refine it. So we keep on changing, but certainly fundamental things the Constitution don't change. Integrity, it doesn't change. Ethics don't change. We'll talk about them later and how they can help us to interface with yourselves here. Respect for human rights, they don't change. Individual freedoms, certain limits, they don't change. I will define them a little later if it's necessary. Sustainable development, part of us. The other C is culture. We can never deny our culture, even as I talk about the 3rd C. Even the pastors agree that every country has a culture. Culture is really about a set of values and norms that govern you. And we have been brought up by a culture that respects, for example, the family, respects the role of the parents in bringing the children, respects marriage, for example. Values, respect for other people, love for other people, these are cultural values. And the 3rd C is the Christian value. Zambia, in its constitution, is embedded the first paragraph that Zambia is declared a Christian country. It doesn't mean that we have no respect for other religions. We cannot prosecute them. We cannot say don't worship here. They are there. We got about 10% other religions who freely worship in Zambia. But what dictates performance of government is Christian value. I was telling a few investors recently who felt they have to bribe a government official to access certain things in Zambia. Say, you never do it because we are not only governed by our own ethical disposition, constitutional demands, but our own Christian values, our ethic demand that we don't do it. I know people can behave the way they want to do, but as ambassador, I can never take anything. I have been Director General of Broadcasting Station before, the National Broadcasting Corporation, and I know certain people from other nations would come home with 250,000 US dollars, not one, not two, not three, four different companies for digital migration access. And I'll tell them that not only because they're abroad, but I can never do it because my own personal belief, once I do it, I'm dead. I'm gone, my future is gone, my children's future is dead, my grandchildren is dead. I would rather make a sacrifice by saying no. So I think for now I will stop here and I will elaborate more if there's any need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Pastor Osakwe, I think this is maybe a good time for you to discuss from your perspective. I mean, for relationships to flourish and be strong, there has to be a basis, a foundation, and that trust. You must have a relationship based on trust. And to have the shared values would seem to me the major, if not the principal ingredient to make that work between America and Africa. What is your view if you kind of dig down on a compare, contrast the values that you see of America and that you see in Africa? And if you could just kind of give your views on how the values of each, where we can find something in common and build that relationship that will flourish into more business deals, into more exchange programs, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Max, for the opportunity. Thanks for Dave, I believe it's Dave and his team, and Pastor Swansea for inviting me. It's an honor to be here, and also to sit with such a distinguished guests. That's a great honor. I never thought I'd be sitting with such a caliber of people, but I guess God has blessed me again. Right, so thank you so much. But in respect to your question, and also to contribute to what my brother just said, I think it's about trust. The whole idea of democracy in Africa was accepted, as a better process to government, and that's how it was accepted. But then, when it was accepted, it also came with certain values. So that's why it was embraced. Now, what's happening now is a clash of values. So we have shared values, but now we have a clash of values. And that's going to, already it's costing a lot of problems. It's costing a lot of problems, and there's distrust. So, for instance, like you mentioned, when there's aid, when aid is brought, but there's an agenda. In other words, if you're going to accept, if we're going to give you the aid, then you have to accept, in quote, civil rights or human rights. Then the question is, what do you mean by human rights? That's the problem of the LGBTQ agenda, and then abortion as well. So these things have been, it's a way of, it's almost like we're being intimidated in a sense. And so democracy, a lot of African countries who hitherto accepted democracy, right, are beginning to take another look at it. In other words, if this democracy is about accepting these agendas, then we don't feel comfortable about it. So really, if you look back in the history of America, you will see there's a lot of values that are shared with African culture. For instance, family, they believe in a strong family unit. Africans believe in family. We have a very strong community sense. In Africa, it's said that it takes a community to raise a child, right? So we have that open door policy. We have hospitality. We receive people, but we also have foundational issues that are connected to the Judeo-Christian foundations, which is, for instance, marriage. We believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And that's what the Bible teaches. And Christianity is beginning to spread in Africa. There's a revival in Africa right now, right? And the revival is still based on fundamental Christianity. So it's a conflict when we're told to accept democracy, which is based on Christian values, right? And then, with the other hand, you're trying to get us to accept something which contradicts our faith. It contradicts biology. It contradicts nature. How are we going to accept that? So that's a major, a major gap that has to be bridged somehow if there's going to be collaboration. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty and, like I said, distrust. So we hope that as in moving forward, that those areas will be addressed. So that I was talking with somebody about something like this, and in certain Arab countries, their stance on the LGBTQ lifestyle is much worse than in African countries. Yet they're not as what do I use now? They're not. Africans are much more punished for their own convictions than in some other Arab countries. And that's because the Africans tend to have needs, the financial needs. Those other countries don't have as much need as Africans do. So that's a problem that we have to really bridge.
Thank you, it was very helpful. Professor Destro, you're in an interesting situation in which you were the lead U.S. government official promoting democracy abroad. During the Trump administration, we had a global pro-life. We were uncompromising on that, and promoting trade and investment over just traditional aid, promoting self-reliance. But at the same time, since you left government, you've been very much involved in trying to promote relationships, especially on the economic side, between the state of Virginia and Africa. So I'd like to throw those two things to you. I see obviously the values of free enterprise, entrepreneurship and all, but none of that seems to be possible if we don't have a basis for partnership that is shared values. What's your comment?
Well, once again, thank you, Max, for inviting me, and I'm honored to be on this panel. I also want to congratulate the governor on his recent election, too. This is we have all new governors in Nigeria, and we're looking forward to the opportunity to work with them. But let me kind of go back to square one, what the ambassador talked about the conditions that are put on gifts. And the fact of the matter is, as I became the Assistant Secretary of State, it was for the Bureau at State that is the nerve center of all the things that you're talking about. People have asked me since I've been out, what is it that you learned there? And I said, well, I think we really need a very serious conversation about putting the human back in human rights. And that we talk about rights all the time, but we never talk about the humanity of the people who we're dealing with. And if you look at whether or not it came from the Lord himself or from the great teacher Maimonides, it's like at the end of the day, there's one rule: love God and love your neighbor. And as Maimonides says, the rest of it's commentary. And so if you think about one of the things that surprised me is how much as Assistant Secretary I wound up dealing with business and human rights. That it was probably a good 60% of my portfolio. I was surprised at that. Democracy programs are a relatively small piece of that. And at the foundation of all business is the idea of a contract. And a contract presupposes that the parties are equal. They're of equal dignity, they're of equal bargaining position, you know, and that you don't come in and say, hey, I'm gonna give you a gift, you know, a gift for this contract, but by the way, I've got my fingers crossed and I don't really owe you anything. That's not really a contract. That's not really respect for the other side. And so when you say values, you know, probably the most important piece of business is values. Do you take advantage of people? Do you work them to death? Do you lie to them? Do you cheat? Do you steal? I mean, if the answer is no, don't tell me about your values, because you don't have it. You know, and this is where the ambassador from Tanzania, you know, was talking earlier about, look, we have all these great natural resources. You know, countries like Zambia and Nigeria are very rich countries. They're rich in the most important resource of all are the people there. The rest of it's just dirt, really. You know, but it becomes developed through the hard work and ingenuity of the people who live there. And if we, in the West, or, you know, it doesn't matter whether we're in China or whether it's Russia or anybody else, if we treat the people like dirt, then don't be surprised if they reject what you call your values. I mean, there was a wonderful, I'm old enough to remember, there was a great cartoon, you know, when I was growing up called Pogo. And it was just little stick figures, and but one of the great panels would always said, we have met the enemy and he is us. Okay, and so the idea is that for those of us who are Americans, we have to look very hard at our own policy, and we're not doing that. It's where you put your money is where your policy is. And it's very hard to get people in Washington where I live. It's very hard even for Congress people to understand that what people say, what Secretary Blinken says, you know, or what Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen says. It says, I would say, yeah, that's what they say, but let's see what they do. You know, and what they do in Nigeria is what's done in these programs. You know, and unless you get down to the operational level, you know, and as Max was saying earlier, he says by the time the money gets to the ground, at least 50% has been taken off on overhead. You know, and then, you know, and as one of my Nigerian friends who lives in Lagos, he said, I showed him a list of grants. And he said, wow, he says, this is like the dew that never made it to the ground. You know, so if we want to talk about values, the first value is don't manipulate other people. You know, treat them as equals. And I'll just close with an observation made by a very good friend who was one of my predecessors in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And I went to him about a month and a half ago, had lunch with him, and asked him about having a conference for a different region of the world. I said, what if we just brought in leaders like the ambassador and the governor? And we just said, look, we want you to let your hair down. We're going to use Chatham House rules. You know, so, you know, you can say what's said, but you're not allowed to say who said it. You know, and we want you to tell us what a pain in the neck we are to work with. Okay, so what's it like to work with us, right? And he just looked at me, he said, you know, Bob, that would be revolutionary. You know, and I said, well, wait a minute, this doesn't seem quite right. I said, revolutionary isn't quite the word. I said, you know, that would be innovative or something like that. He said, no. He says, in that region of the world, we have always treated the people who live there like part of the local flora and fauna. Now that's what the Chinese do, that's what the Russians do, and that's what we do. You know, and the point is, if we start treating people like partners, you know, and having the Reverend say to me, you know, Bob, that's really interesting, but I don't believe a word of it. Unless he can say that to me, we're not partners. And so that's to me, the value is expressed, you know, when Jesus said, love your neighbor, love yourself, as you love, you know, love your neighbor as you love yourself, and love God among all things. And I think that's the value we need to be doing.
We are not seeing our shared values right now in Israel, which is under incredible assault by just raw hatred, barbarism. Governor, you've been recently elected. Congratulations. You face a very difficult situation in the Plateau State, where Christianity is under attack, and so many parts of Nigeria have come under assault for years. It's not new, but it seems to be even getting worse. And I think all of us would benefit from hearing the tragedy and the pain being felt by the Christian communities in Nigeria. But at the same time, Nigeria is a country of 200 million, more than 200 million people. It's rich. I mean, Nigerians who come to America become the richest. I think they have the highest income of all diaspora groups. I think they have the highest education. So yes, the value, Bob, is not in the dirt, it's in the people. And I know you wanted an opportunity to discuss that as well.
Thank you, Max, and it's a privilege and honor to share this platform with these distinguished gentlemen. Let me say also a big thank you to Liberty University for giving us this platform to share ideas and to be able to network globally. For me, it's quite a privilege and honor to be here. Yes, Plateau State, which I have the privilege to govern, has been under siege for quite some time. There is an historical context to it. Perhaps because of the recent elections, it's not just Plateau State. The entire middle belt of Nigeria has been quite under siege for some time. And it's not so much, first of all, about religion. People use religion as the basis to be able to go for the land, particularly. It's about a contest of identity, a contest about land. And over the years, from colonial times, I do remember one of the British colonial leaders who retired and came back to Nigeria several years later. And he was asked this question, if he had any regrets about the caliber of Nigerians that they handed over leadership to post-independence. And of course, he felt that question was uncomplimentary. And but the reality is that we have faced over time a leadership crisis in Nigeria, which has not allowed us to be able to project our own values that you are talking about. There is no doubt that the Plateau State is a Christian-dominated state. And much of the Middle Belt is dominated by Christian values, Christian people that did not convert to Islam. Now, over time, that has exerted its own pressure. And just before I took over as governor, there was a reign of terror that was unleashed on my own community particularly, which was perhaps an attempt to destabilize my administration. And to the glory of God, we've been able to contain it to some extent. And we have relative peace now. But that is not to suggest that the battle is over. We know that the contest for land is going to continue. And as long as we also insist on maintaining our identity and by extension our own values, there's still going to be an assault. And that is where we need the global pressure to be able to empathize with us and know that this is what we are going through, and to exert pressure on the central government to be able to come to the table with justice, with equity, so that we can be able to thrive in the democratic setting in which we find ourselves. What we are seeing, maybe not just in America, but to some extent, we're beginning to see some misuse of rights, as it were, and people who feel entitled over others. And if the space is modeled up, then we'll continue to have this kind of pressures that we have. But that notwithstanding, amidst these challenges, I want to tell Americans, I want to tell everybody that cares to know that Africa, and particularly Nigeria, still remains a fantastic investment destination. And of course, the market is there. The market is about people. And I want you to know that somebody described Nigeria as a huge construction site with so many opportunities waiting to be tapped. And for us on the plateau particularly, it's an investment hub. Despite all the pressure and the challenges of insecurity, we know that we have to build an economy. We know that we have to take our people out of poverty. And it is because of that we are building the networks we are building, so that the more we take our people out of poverty, the more they will be able to resist the onslaughts that are coming. And they will be able to project their own identity, and they will be able to develop their own and protect their own values. And that is our agenda. We're trying to build a people that can build a future that is based on shared values. A future that is based on not just talking about Christ, but living out the Christian identity.
Thank you. About poverty, indeed, we spent a lot of money. U.S. government spends tens of billions of dollars every year, and then the Europeans an equal amount, and World Bank and others. Literally, you're talking about 60 to 80 to 90 billion dollars a year. And yet, if you look at some of the reports or programs from 20, 30 years ago, it's the same language. In other words, we have failed. Literally tens of billions of dollars. We have not moved the needle. I'd like to ask all of you, what do we need to do to transition away from, you can call it Christian charity, but to self-help, a culture of self-help, especially amongst the youth. Many of you are coming from countries where youth are the majority, they're huge. And I know a lot of people who travel to Africa and do a lot of philanthropic work, and what strikes me is when they have photographs of the children in schools, they're all happy. The resilience is amazing. So what can we do? I mean, Trump administration, we tried very hard to move away from traditional ways of doing aid, monies that we don't even know where it's going, quite frankly, and promote instead a focus on trade and investment. So, Bob, as well as you, because you're doing both, but others from Africa, I'd like to hear the African voices on how can we spend money much better, especially to help the youth be able to turn Africa into the dynamism that it merits.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Max. I must admit that it's not these organizations that have failed. I would want to admit that even as leaders in Africa, we have failed. I must admit that we haven't shown that level of leadership that ought to be trusted. Our people have gone through a cycle of hope and despair, and we are hoping that we can be able to build a new crop of leaders that their own people can trust. That is very critical. What has happened over the years, there's a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. And I've said, the time has come when we in Africa must agree that it's not Europe that underdeveloped us. We ourselves agree to be underdeveloped. And so we have to come to a point in time where we say enough is enough and agree that we must rise to the occasion. Because leadership is about accountability. Whether it is wealth that is self-generated, or whether it is aid that came from America or Europe, the basic thing that will make us to get value for those investments is accountability. And over the years, I think we have failed to exhibit that quality of leadership. And I, particularly by the grace of God, where I'm coming from, my pedigree, I know that I carry a huge responsibility, that I must be able to demonstrate my Christian values and show myself to be accountable to the people and by conduct. And so I think rather than just national government to national government, perhaps there needs to be some a transition towards some selective engagement with subnationals that can be trusted. We must be able to raise the bar. We must be able to lay certain criteria, of course, not imposing values that we must run away from. If the aid is coming from America and Europe with conditions attached that encroach into our own value system, like the ambassador had stated, then of course you know that we'll be reluctant to take it. But if there are some basic rules of engagement that talk about accountability, show us that you can be trusted, I think it will go a long way in making sure that we, and therefore the purpose for which these funds were brought in, and even the resources we generate locally, can be properly utilized for the development of our people.
Pastor.
I fully support what the governor has said and everybody else. I believe that it's also important that we shift the focus to the youth empowerment. Right now, you know, we used to say the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. I actually believe the youth are the leaders of today. The way cultures are evolving. So we need to really focus on the youth and help build their capacity. You know, even in terms of ethical standards. The way things are now, they don't always have a good example to follow. So if we can provide platforms that are, you know, that present a standard ethical example, it'll help. You know, there's a lot of, I mean, the truth must be told, there's a lot of corruption, you know, among leadership in Africa, and it's part of the problem. If we can get the youth to adjust their standards, you know, because I talk to a lot of youth, we have youth programs, and I see that the youth are tired of the, in quote, disaster. They want something better, all right? So this is the best time to catch the youth. We need to have strategic programs, you know, and find, you know, organizations that are going to, you know, already working with the youth in a very practical sense and empower them. There's a lot that they can learn. There's quality education, there's skills development, not just, you know, formal education, but vocational training. You know, there's so many areas, you know, there's leadership and governance. I think it's time we enable the youth to get involved in the leadership process, in the political process, you know, a lot more. You know, you have the need for entrepreneurship and mentorship. You know, if we can get mentors coming from the US who are going to come to mentor, but not just mentor, also, you know, not just mentor in business, but mentor, you know, bringing out that Christian character and how you can combine business and character, you know, because some people think for you to be successful in business, you have to be a crook. That's the truth. A lot of youngsters in Africa believe you have to do something, you know, crooked to make money. But there are people who have gone ahead who have made a lot of money and who still have that character. And that's what we need. So I think we need to focus more on the youth.
Thank you. Hello. There's a story, but before a story analogy, which will help me deliver my point in a very few minutes. First of all, let me share that there has been a positive, two stories which really been positive donor support. It's not that really everything is not working for us. I'll give the story of PEPFAR and the AIDS drugs and what they have done to the livelihoods in much of Africa. My own personal experience was that before these drugs were made available to the people, I used to have a minimum 2 funerals every month of very close relatives, either a brother, a sister, my brother's wife, my sister's husband. That was a non-story. And you can imagine the impact it had on some of us who worked, who had an income. They were not on insurance. So the insurance was us for the funerals, for the medical care. Since PEPFAR, we have seen evidence of livelihoods improved drastically. Now, go 3 years without hearing someone has died within my close family members. That's a story. I thought that is a positive that we need to commend the U.S. government for the generosity. There could be questions around it, but it has worked for us. This short story and a question, what we need to do. There's a story, we all know the story, of course, of the young girls in a village who used to go to draw water 5 kilometers away from the village to draw water. They put on their heads. These are young girls and draw water. And here comes a funder who looks at what's happening and he feels sorry. He says, we can't allow these young girls to go 5 kilometers to draw water, put on their heads every single day, maybe twice a day. He decided on his own that I'm going to sink a borehole right in the village so that the girls don't have to travel 5 kilometers. And he did sink the borehole for water. But the girls continued to go 5 kilometers to draw water. And he wanted to find out why. And they whispered to him and said, no, actually, 5 kilometers from the village gives the girls an opportunity to find suitable husbands for the future. That's where they meet their men for husbands. The story is they should have consulted. And I think that is my response to your question. We can't impose on us that this is what you need. Consult us, the recipients, and we'll tell you what exactly will make the difference in our lives. Thank you.
Yeah, you will hear statements, and you'll see on the website of our assistance agencies about local ownership. And it's all over the place, but it doesn't happen in practice. And without that, obviously, it's just common sense. You can't have sending bureaucrats from Washington, D.C. and figure out what's happening in a village in Zambia. It's stupid, right? Bob, do you want to add to that as well?
Yes, I mean, let me address a couple of the points. Let me start with the governor. And the governor made the point, which we have been pushing for the last year, since last year's conference, which we have to do things on a subnational basis. And that includes youth programs. Now, you know, my experience in the federal government is that it's way too big. There's no way that you can look from Washington into a village in the Plateau State and understand anything. And as the late American Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, said once upon a time, all politics is local, and all trust is local. And so that was the reason why about a little over a year ago last summer, we invited Governor Orton, from Benue State to come, and we arranged meetings with the Virginia Department of Agriculture. And it was a very interesting meeting, and the relationships have been built on that level because the state of Virginia wants to do business. They just don't know who to do business with, right? And it was just watching the Commissioner of Agriculture and the governor trying to figure out, well, what would you buy from us, and what would you sell to us? And people have in this country have the idea that Africans are victims. They're not. Africa is the future. I mean, it's the breadbasket, the mineral of the world. And it's got some of the smartest, youngest people that you're ever going to find. That's the future. And so when it finally clicked that, our Commissioner of Agriculture said, well, here's what we sell. And it was very interesting. He says, well, we don't need that. He says, we grow our own. And I said, yeah, what they need from you is the expertise, the agronomy, the equipment, the financing. I mean, all the things that go into building an economy. And as soon as that connection got made, the conversation changed to well, let's see what we can do. Now, if we look at the same question with respect to youth, youth don't learn anything by going to school. They learn things by doing things. That's what you mean by mentorship program. And if you look at the gospel, where is the one place that Jesus is absolutely brutal? And it's the parable of the talents, where the man buried his talents, and not only did they throw him out, they gave what he made to everybody else. I mean, that is an absolutely brutal story. And he says very specifically, you send one of these children astray, it's better that we put a millstone around your neck. Okay, that's what's happening when kids think that I have to be crooked. And that's because they're treated like crooks. And so there's plenty of programs. I know of a wonderful program in Lagos. We should have exactly the same kind of a program in Richmond. And the whole idea is, how do you build? That's why I'm so glad that our Ms. Agee, who's in the back, is with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. We've got other people who are interested. The state of Virginia wants to open up an office for Africa. There's only one state in the United States that has one, Florida. But other people have little offices. Minnesota has one. North Carolina is very interested. I've talked to them. And so the question is, there's conversation partners, but you're the ones who are going to have to identify the people you trust, because we know the people we can trust, and the people you can trust. The whole point of having WhatsApp is to be able to say, hey, look, you two need to meet each other. I mean, that's Jesus picked 12. He lost one of them. He lost a bunch of other ones too, but and he picked the leaders. And that's because he trusted them.
It's fantastic. We're getting close to the end of our panel, but I wanted to ask Africa's opinion. Ms. Logan raised the issue of the whole climate going green being imposed on Africa. And I thought I wanted to follow up on that, because in many places in the West, this has become a religion. It's a cult. And the fervor with which they are pushing it, defying the facts on the ground, defying science. Same people who claim science are behind it don't care about the facts. I just wanted to get an African view of how you have such abundance of food, of all resources, of the mines, rare earth minerals, oil and gas, and you need to develop these and you can responsibly with the new technology that we have, that it's clean, but benefits your people. I'm just kind of interested from your perspective when you hear the West talking about saving the planet, and yet you have to bear the cost. What your reaction is, Ambassador?
Thank you. Just this morning, the lead news item in Zambia was about Chief Chitimukulu. I have my pressman here. He knows Chief Chitimukulu. Chief Chitimukulu is the leader, ethnic leader of the largest tribal grouping in Zambia, and he's a very powerful man. And he was warning other chiefs, be careful about this carbon trading issue. Many of you are sacrificing the future. You are doing it for money. You don't understand the implications. And I think if there's a view from the continent, one is a mix of not understanding what this whole thing is about. We don't know what it is about. We have seen the consequences of climate change. We are bearing the burden of it. We're experiencing it in low output, low yield in agriculture. The rain pattern has changed, droughts, and then we have got floods. These things we are witnessing today. How the whole thing is being managed, I think that is where we don't understand. Even as ambassador, right now, I do not understand what role we have to play as government to ensure we collaborate, mediate properly between our own people in the villages, those who have got these forests, have to trade off for carbon for carbon, as well as those who are pushing the agenda. Is it a genuine, is it authentic? Are we paying the price? But maybe one thing here, 2002, when we had drought, we had no food in Zambia. And the USA offered maize, GMO maize. The Zambian president then, Patrick Bonawasa, says would rather die out of hunger than allow a single kilogram of GMO maize cross our border into this country. And he refused. Totally refused. People are starting to say, no, we can accept to survive today, but we shall sacrifice the future. We won't do it. And indeed, that has been the stance on all this about climate. I think we are trying to draw the line saying we shall do that which we understand. Technological advancement says, but we need to understand the implications into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one quick note from our Nigerian colleagues, because I think it was last year or 2 years ago, your former vice president had a piece in Foreign Affairs that was very influential. He's very critical of the hypocrisy. Just one quick word.
For me, I think it's about the method of communicating the message. Because some of the realities of climate change are real. Like the ambassador mentioned, we're dealing with issues of drought, and which is leading to the issues of hunger and what have you. But when you try to communicate the message from a sense of superiority, it gets lost. And so the West needs to rediscover its humanity and know that, look, let's discuss this with mutual respect. And we'll be able to now know what is beneficial to us within the context of the debate about climate change. And we'll key into it. But where it is simply being forced down your throat, then it raises suspicion. And so many of the things the West is battling with, even when you talk about values, we are not concerned about them because we're dealing with a crisis of hunger. And there's something that a hungry man does not care about. But for the West, they've dealt with those issues to a large extent. So they can afford some of those luxurious discussions. But until we get to the point where we resolve the issues of hunger and poverty, we would not be on the same page with the Western countries.
Good. Well, I want to thank the panelists. A very interesting discussion. I mean, the shared values, I think, is point center for why we are all here. And thank you in the audience for listening. Thank you.